Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be doing something different. It's not going to be a math video, but it's sort of like an overview of the SAT video. So if you've just started preparing for the SAT and you're in high school, I recommend you watch this video before starting to prepare, or if you're preparing, I would recommend you still watch this video anyways. So we're going to be going over an format of the SAT, so it's basically an overview of the format, and also I'm going to go through some tips and resources you can use to help you ace the SAT. So let's get started. First off, before we get started, of course, I do have a website. I've launched this new website called The Ultimate Guide to High School. It is sort of like your one-stop guide to all things high school. I have numerous resources on it. All the math videos on this channel are on that website. I also have a blog where I talk about different topics like volunteering and studying and mental health to college applications and stuff. And then I also have tips. So everything in this video will also be on the website. I have SAT, ACT, and IGCSE prep tips, so to help you prep and ace those exams. And the link is in the description box, so make sure to check that out. So let's get started. We're going to be looking at four major different factors today. One is the format of the test, so the different questions, how much time you'll have, all that kind of stuff. If you're new, I recommend you watch that first. Next, we're going to talk about general test taking tips. So generally when you're just studying for the SAT, this also applies to just general tests as well. And then we're going to talk about section specific tips. So these are tips that you can use per each section, and the reading, writing, and math, and it's going to be section specific. So it's a bit more helpful than I guess than the general test taking tips. And then we're going to go through some final thoughts. So the format of the test. First off, you have five different sections. First, you have the evidence-based reading. You have 65 minutes to answer 52 questions. Then you have the writing section, and you have 35 minutes to answer 44 questions. And your score for the reading and writing sections will be 800 in total. So you'll get a section score of 800. Now, of course, these are two of, in my opinion, the hardest sections, but that differs for everyone. And you do have a bit of a time constraint in the writing section because you have 44 questions, but only 35 minutes to write it. So you have less than 1 minute per question. And on the reading section, you have a bit more than a minute per question, but you still need to work fast. After that, you have the math no calculator and the math calculator section. The math no calculator section is 25 minutes for 20 questions, and the math calculator section is 55 minutes for 38 questions. And your score for both the math sections combined will be 800. So if you add your reading and writing score 800 plus 800 for the math, you'll get the total score of 1600. There is an essay that's optional, and most students won't take the essay, but some students do. It all just depends on the college you're applying to. So make sure you look at various colleges. If you want to be on the safe side, I would recommend you take the essay. You'll have 50 minutes to answer one essay prompt, so you'll need to write one essay, and it's scored on a different scale, so you'll have to look into that separately. Here are some general test prep tips. So number one, don't attempt the test without studying. So this may work in some cases. Sometimes I know students who just walk into the test and get a 1600. Now, not everyone's like that. Not everyone has the same test taking ability. Not everyone's as accurate academically, so I would recommend that you do study for the SAT, even if it's only for 2 weeks. Try to study before you attempt your first test. It's bound to improve your score. Review some math formulas, maybe some math concepts, go through some grammar skills and stuff. And another point on why you shouldn't attempt the test without studying is because some colleges require for you to submit your entire testing history. So some colleges may say that they want to see your entire testing history, and this means whatever test you've taken throughout the years. So let's say you're in 10th grade and you want to go take the SAT just to see how you do, and you don't study for it, you don't prep for it, you just go in and take the exam, and you get a score that's less than average. Well, that's not good, obviously, one, because if you go in and take the test a couple months later and end up scoring somewhere near 1500, colleges are going to see that you've had that huge jump in just preparing for the test. Now, that does look good because it shows how you've improved, but it also shows that your lack of test taking ability in 10th grade has sort of correlated to a higher score in 11th grade, and there is a gap between that. So it's safer to just take the test after studying for a couple of weeks. The next tip is to focus on your weak areas. And how I like to do this is first, before you start preparing, take a practice test. Now, if you've already started preparing for the SAT, still take a practice test. A practice test, a full practice test that's timed. So use the breaks that are given and try to take it without exceeding your time as well. It can show you where you stand and where you need to prepare more. For example, if you find that you excel in the evidence-based reading or writing section, you only need to largely focus on the math section to bring your score up. That way you sort of pinpoint the areas where you're not doing so well, and you're able to work on them and improve your score in the long run. My next tip is to not procrastinate. Now, this is something I do all the time, but it's super important that you don't procrastinate this time, just because the SAT is something that tests you on the skills you've learned over the years. It's not a textbook exam where you can just memorize the different paragraphs in the textbook and go and ace the exam. You do need to fine-tune your basic math and English skills before you attempt the test. So next, effective studying. Effective studying is what I like to call concentrated studying. So instead of staring at a textbook for 3 hours, it's effective to study in bouts of 15 minutes. So spend 15 minutes studying, then take a break, maybe work on some school, and then come back and do another 15 minutes. This way, all the information you retain is still fresh in your brain, and you're able to retain it for a longer time. And it sort of just stays in your brain for a longer time, and you understand it better because you're not overwhelmed with all the information you've studied over the past couple hours. So now let's talk about section-specific tips. So first is the evidence-based reading section. My first tip is to understand or actively read the passage. Now, I know a lot of students who don't read the passage and they just sort of attempt the questions without just skimming over the passage. Now, this may work, and it may work if you're that type of reader, but for me personally, actively reading and understanding what the author is saying can help you answer questions quickly and accurately. I like to actively read the passage. Even if I spend 3 to 4 minutes, I like to understand and interpret all the words in the passage and then go in and try the questions. So the time you spend actively reading the passage will be made up, since you'll find the questions easier to understand and answer, and you're likely to select the correct answer. My next tip is to find the match. So on the SAT, there's always just going to be one correct answer. There's never going to be two. The College Board needs to make sure that there's one correct answer so that students can't sort of debate on the different questions and say why that answer is correct. Now, because of this, there will always be evidence in the passage. That's why it is called the evidence-based reading section, because there's evidence in the passage. You just have to look for the matching content in the passage. And if you can't find evidence that supports one answer, try to find the evidence that contradicts the other answer choices, so you can sort of use the process of elimination to find your answer. So now let's talk about the evidence-based writing section. So this is what I like to call the grammar section because it tests you on various grammar skills and some also comprehension-based grammar. So my first tip is to read aloud. If your native language is English or your first language is English, I would recommend you read aloud. Reading aloud and seeing, especially for the grammar skills questions, so like punctuation, maybe sentence structure, comma placement, those kind of questions, you can read the question aloud and see which one sounds best, and that will be your answer. I personally got through most of the writing section by just reading it aloud. Now, don't read it out loud, but try to read it out loud in your mind, if that makes sense. If your native language is not English, then you're going to want to do repetitive grammar drills. So first off, you're going to want to go learn the skills that you're sort of weak in. So you're going to go through the skills that you're not as well in, and you're going to learn the different grammar rules. And then you're going to go do repetitive grammar drills. So you're going to be doing various questions on testing those skills that you're weak in. And the more you do, the more you practice. So it's just practicing that'll help you get through this section. Next is the math section. My first tip for the math section is to practice. This comes without saying. The math on the SAT isn't high level. They're not going to ask you about derivatives. They just require you to manipulate certain basic math concepts and put them to use. So you're going to want to know how to, it's sort of like knowing the backwards methods of math. So instead of rearranging an equation to find the answer for x, it's sort of back solving and using x to find the original equation. That sounds really confusing, but the more you practice, the better it becomes. So a simple way to get familiar with the math on the SAT is to practice. My next tip is to plug in the answer choices. If it's a question where they ask you to solve for x, plug in the values given in the answer choices and see which one matches and completes the equation. It's really simple, but it can really help you in tough questions, and it's something that a lot of people overlook. It's something that I even overlooked for a long time. So next, here are some final thoughts. First, don't freak out if you are just preparing or you're in the process of preparing and you don't think you're doing so well and you want a higher score. Don't freak out. Just focus and study. Do effective studying. Use all the tips I've given. Check out my website for some resources, and that'll help you. Just don't freak out. You're bound to improve, and especially if you have some time, you're going to improve. Next, stay tuned for more videos talking about specific sections of the test in detail. So I will have a couple videos going out about how to find the match in the reading passage, as I've talked about. For the writing section, I'm also going to be talking about how you should read aloud. I will be going through a couple of examples, and also for the math section, I will be going through a couple of practice problems and telling you how to back solve or plug in the answer choices. Next, don't forget to check out my website. The link is in the description box down below. It has a lot of resources that you can use to ace high school. And finally, subscribe. This is a math YouTube channel, and you can also comment down below video suggestions if you have any. A lot of the topics I go through in detail in my videos are what comes up on the SAT, so check them out for some more help with math videos, or comment down below video suggestions.